Hi, John. I've had a barking dog for hours. I was just stopped. I was like, "How are you feeling?" Oh, you're muted.
I feel good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is John. I'm part of Human Resources Los Angeles. I'm very thankful for Daisy and Chris for bringing the book launch to us, and to John Tain for connecting us with them. It's a really incredible book that there's more information on our website, which I'll put the link to where you can buy the book in the chat. But yeah, thank you all for being here. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Daisy and Chris.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this book reading. And some of you may have gotten the physical book in the mail, but it looks like this. But thank you so much, John, and everyone at Human Resources LA for hosting us, and everyone at Kyopo and SDA for supporting this event and spreading the word and all the work that you do for the community. So thank you to everyone. Yeah, tonight we're really excited because we get to hear from really special readers tonight. So just to go over a little bit of the format, we'll do readings about 5 or 6 minutes each, and then we'll also leave some time for Q&A. And Chris and I will just introduce a little bit about the book, but just to give you guys a sense of who's reading first, or the order of the readers, it's Christine Kim will go first, and then it's Josh Kline, Jesse Chun, Kim Nguyen, and John Tain, and then Spencer Ye. So thank you so much to all the readers and also to contributing to this book and being part of the project. Yeah, Chris and I guess we'll just share a little bit about the book. We embarked on this project a little over a year ago before we knew that we would all be in a pandemic. So Chris and I had met over coffee and kind of created this just out of organically talking about what our projects were. We were both doing letter projects about letters, and also we were part of a group through Asia Art Archive in America, and some of the contributors were part of this reading group. And so this is now a collection of 73 letters from Asian American writers and curators and artists and thinkers that we collected over the course of the year. I don't know, Chris, if you want to jump in and share a little bit more.
No, that's a wonderful, wonderful introduction. And I should also mention there are some other contributors in the audience. I think Mark Handelman is here, and Kenneth Tam, who will soon have a show at the Shed, is also here, taking time out of precious installation time. So thank you so much for that. And really, that kind of generosity of time and effort for something that ended up taking over a year is indicative, I think, of the gratitude that Daisy and I feel for all of the contributors, and especially the ones who are here speaking tonight. I think we will hear directly from the speakers, but I will say on Daisy and my behalf that the letters that came in they floored us with their vulnerability and their fearlessness and their verve and their polemic and their well, I think vulnerability is a great term. So it really they really tug on any number of emotions, often all in the same letter. So thank you for sharing, and I'm really happy that as audience members, you will hear directly from the writers and in their voices. So perhaps we should turn to our first speaker, Christine Y. Kim, who is a curator at LACMA and also founder of Kyopo. Daisy, would you like to introduce or say any more about Christine?
No, I think I'll let you take it away from here. Thanks, Christine. Oh, I think you might have to unmute.
Thank you, Chris and David, for putting together this incredible anthology of letters. I can only imagine that when you started talking about it many months ago, that, oh, something funky is happening with the view. It's only on Daisy. That, yeah, I think Daisy is spotlit, whoever's controlling back there. That you had no idea where we'd be today. And I think it feels especially kind of significant and poignant that it's on the year anniversary of George Floyd's murder as we think about race in America, as we think about solidarity, and many of the themes and elements that have come up in this anthology. So thank you for the invitation, also to Human Resources for hosting this event. This letter is for Bell Hooks. August 14th, 2020, to my 6th grade self. Sorry, I gotta change this view because it's really making me feel anxious seeing Daisy's face only huge. Okay, here we go. To my 6th grade self. Hey you, me, this letter is from you, Christine, age 44 in 2020. Don't freak out, you're gonna be fine. You will have a fulfilling life and career in New York and then in Los Angeles, despite your current feelings about puberty, the playground bullies who make fun of your fish egg, seaweed, and rice bento lunches, and the perpetual sense that you don't belong. You will also have 2 healthy children who have inherited your tenacity, love for pickled foods and bow legs, and a loving, supportive, and equitable partner. Also, you won't have to cut paper napkins in half with scissors along the crease to save money, as your mom taught you to do. Today's America is a very different place than it was in 1983. Technology has produced smartphones, which are tiny cordless computers, smaller than your little Twin Stars pencil case, that serve as all-in-one telephones, cameras, video game consoles, TVs, stereos, newspapers, and portable libraries in real time. One of the hottest musical genres is the South Korean export K-pop, exemplified by a boy band called BTS, who released 2 of the 3 top-selling albums in the world in 2018, which, for your reference, is way more than Duran Duran. And we will elect a Black president in 2008, the year your older daughter, whose father is African-American, will be born. Now, this next part may be confusing for an 11-year-old, but bear with me. I'm going to try to explain as clearly as I can why I'm writing this letter to you. Last year, the New York Times published the 1619 Project on the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first ship of enslaved Africans whom the Portuguese kidnapped from Angola to the British colony of Virginia. The series reframed US history, centering the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans in the national narrative. Despite the quality of your education, your schooling is Eurocentric and will require a lifetime of unlearning. In her introductory essay, journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones recalls a childhood memory that became the inspiration for this letter to you, my younger self. Above all, I want you to take steps toward your own liberation through knowledge, empathy, and courage. And in order to do so, you must stake your claim and state your truth at every turn, starting in the classroom. Hannah-Jones writes, quote, "When I was a child, I must have been in 5th or 6th grade, a teacher gave our class an assignment intended to celebrate the diversity of the great American melting pot. She instructed each of us to write a short report on our ancestral land, then draw that nation's flag. As she turned to write the assignment on the board, the other Black girl in the class locked eyes with me. Slavery had erased any connection we had to an African country. And even if we tried to claim the whole continent, there was no African flag. It was hard enough being one of the 2 Black kids in the class, and the assignment would just end up being another reminder of the distance between the white kids and us. In the end, I walked over to the globe near my teacher's desk, picked a random African country, and claimed it as my own. I wish now that I could go back to the younger me and tell her that her people's ancestry started here on these lands, and to boldly, proudly draw the stars and stripes of the American flag. We were told once by virtue of our bondage that we could never be American, but it was by virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all," end quote. The story of Hannah Jones' ancestry and diaspora differs starkly from your own. Her four parents were forced into servitude generations ago, while your parents came here in search of opportunity. Her ancestry was erased by chattel slavery, while you can trace your roots back to the Oisang Kim Chongyed lineage, dating back to the founding of the Shilla dynasty, 57 BCE to 935 CE, as your dad tells you all the time. African Americans have experienced some of the most overt and violent racism in the country, while racism against Asian Americans manifests itself most frequently through the xenophobia and invisibilization of a model, yet still dirty, minority. Both racisms are part of the project of white supremacy and the strategies of oppression, which have trickled down over the centuries from the White House to the schoolhouse. Reading this passage triggered my childhood experiences of humiliation and denial under the white gaze. Hannah Jones' desire to return to the classroom, to correct the assignment, to insist on the existence and belonging, to tell her own truth and universal truths about a country that has inflicted violence, injustice, and pain on generations of Americans, implores me to insist that you reflect on her narrative and these kinds of stories when you experience moments of self-doubt, shame, and pain at school and in your life. Your most powerful tool at this moment is something you already possess: a love for reading, writing, and drawing. I know you lock yourself in your room with your library books and notepads after school until mom starts to nag you to finish your homework, practice violin, bathe, or set the table for dinner. It's okay. I love that you write in the morning, head lowered at the kitchen table while your broth gets cold. You write in secret, quietly, at night, not to wake your sister who sleeps in the twin bed with matching polyester butterfly bedspread next to yours. You write out of loneliness, like seeking correspondence with a pen pal who doesn't respond. Let your composition book be the place where you don't edit your words and pictures, where you explore wherever your mind takes you after carefully studying images of New York City, Grey's Anatomy, or pointillist paintings. Focus less on what you think your teachers and parents want you to write about, and instead go deep into what you can't not let bother you, what you dream about, what must be documented or remembered. The impossibility of this letter, written to you, my younger self, is overridden by psychic necessity. Heeding the guidance of Toni Morrison, who implores, quote, "If there's a book you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. I write what I must say, but cannot be communicated." By the time you're in your late 20s, after graduate school, you will be hired as a curatorial assistant at an incredible museum in New York called the Studio Museum in Harlem, becoming the first Asian American curator at a Black art institution. Yes, this will happen. You will begin to publish your writing, outward-facing nonfiction essays based on research, observation, art history, and theory. You will struggle with deep insecurities about your writing that arise mostly in graduate school. One time, a film professor takes one look at you and asks if you'd like to join the ESL writing class, which will unfairly highlight your feelings of fraudulence. When you write for others, your self-doubt, which comes from having been told at home and at school that you are not good enough, creeps in. Just keep writing for yourself, even if you need to tear up the page immediately afterwards. Your feelings are not shameful. Shame, which should not be confused with humility, is something your parents instill in you with the false belief that it will protect you. Shame will only quash your curiosity, vulnerability, and creativity, and in turn make it easier for others to decenter and dominate your narrative. Below are 3 pieces of advice I want you to try to remember. I'm sorry if this is heavy. I know you're just a kid. And I also know that you don't like people telling you what to do, a consequence of your conditioning. But remember, it's me, your future self. And hopefully that makes this feel less threatening and more visionary. 1, do not let your story be defined by the white imagination. Remember Nicole Hannah Jones' story? When you were made to stand in front of the classroom last year on Ethnic Day, awkwardly donning a hanbok that you outgrew 2 years before, the teacher forced you to talk about your culture while the other students snickered and tugged at the outer edges of their eyes to make them look like paper cuts. You wanted to crawl into your cubbyhole and die. You were not wrong. they were. People will continue to create and perpetuate stereotypes about you to elevate themselves. Your own stories are in those notebooks, and you will understand them more deeply in different intersectional contexts as time goes on. Despite what strangers whisper when they sneer at you, you belong here in this country. Your parents met here as college students in the 1960s, seeking education and a better life, which they found and are grateful for every day. They associate Uncle Sam with heroic US soldiers who defeated the enemy and handed out candy and chocolate to Korean children. They are not versed in the politics of race, class, and gender in America, and you will inherit the trauma of weathering. This effort extends to the trouble you're having fitting in with the white kids, trying to meet their expectations of or assumptions about you. This is probably the hardest advice to hear right now, since mom and dad switched you from your racially mixed public elementary school to private Catholic school the year after Proposition 13 passed in California. Everything is about fitting in when nothing seems to fit at all. I recently read an article written by John Yao, a critic and poet I admire, who recounts, quote, "My biggest regret is that I tried a little too hard to fit in when I first began writing art reviews for Art in America in 1977, as if I could actually pass for a member of the model minority. Why did I keep trying?" End quote. He is over 20 years older than me, but I ask myself the same question. I wish this regret did not befall you. 2, representation matters. Seek out other Asian Americans and peers of color. Connect and empathize with them, though you are told to keep your feelings to yourself. These peers are going to become your closest friends and allies. Stories of representation inform and underscore the urgency of knowledge outside of the white gaze. This is an important way to both empower and humanize yourself and others whose experiences are similarly pushed to the margins, while bullies push to the center and cut in line ahead of you. When a closeted queer thespian in high school who borrows your eyeliner and mascara, you will learn this is never a good kind of sharing, comes out of the closet, meaning he tells you and you alone that he is gay. You will grow from this too. His struggle, courage, and confidence will strengthen your bond, develop your sense of empathy toward another human experience, and inspire you to identify, confront, and enact your own truth. In these intersections, you must also recognize your own privilege as an educated East Asian American within the spectrum of marginalized groups, often pitted against one another. There will be situations when you may feel seduced by the popular white girls who think you're pretty or cool enough to share a limo to prom with them. While their intentions may not be malicious, they don't and can't really see you, not in the suburbs of San Francisco in the 1980s. You will often feel stuck between acceptance from the white kids and loyalty to your non-white peers. In the year you graduate from college and move to New York, an artist named Daniel J. Martinez will put a piece in an influential art exhibition that states, quote, "I can't imagine ever wanting to be white." The sentiment may sound preposterous to you now. Not long ago, you used to leave shampoo in your hair way too long, hoping it would wash out the soiled blackness. But you will come to celebrate its truth and power. 3, last but not least, know where you come from, historically, culturally, biologically, and psychically. Don't be afraid to correct people, especially those who call you Kim, not bothering to ever learn that Kim is a Korean last name, the most common one in Korea with 26 lineages. Piecing mom and dad's immigrant stories together will not be as easy as you think because they are riddled with trauma and expressed with contradiction. You will have to remind yourself that they grew up in a patriarchal, authoritarian, and war-torn Korea, dad from a poor traditional agrarian village in the South, and mom from a cosmopolitan family with privilege in the North who lost everything in the war. Their trauma from poverty, war, violence, and immigration has become part of your biology, psyche, and pathos. When they admonish you to respect and obey authority figures, especially men, and strive strictly for academic and athletic excellence, they have practically no grasp of the social and emotional success in your world. And you hear ad nauseum about the superiority of the Korean language and culture, especially above Japanese, but then they force you to speak English at home. This is because, above all, they want you to succeed in America, the only place they know with security, safety, and opportunity. In some ways, their projection is what hurts you the most. unbeknownst to them, your curiosity and your interest in what you will learn is good trouble will make you particularly strong. Understanding your history requires unpacking these complexities as harmonics, dissonant and incoherent as they may be, to release you from the unresolvable anguish of a perpetual second-generation immigrant purgatory. My heart explodes with rainbow, red balloons, stars, and multicolored heart emojis. You'll see what I mean when you get to smartphones, when I think about all the people, adventures, lessons, and experiences ahead. I am now more than halfway through my life. Despite a treatable autoimmune condition, I am healthy and well. And while I struggle with anxiety and giving myself permission to slow things down, there is little that I would change. Even the bad decisions, failures, breakups, and moments of uncertainty when life shifts keys have led to other registers and encounters. Staying open and humble includes the necessity and perpetual effort of unlearning and listening, the misremembering of things past, intergenerational trauma, and the chaos of embodied knowledge create a kind of memory or post-memory with divots and holes. One of the most empowering accomplishments in your life this far will come in the form of a collective re-engagement with your fellow Korean Americans in Los Angeles. In 2017, you'll co-found a nonprofit art organization called Kyopo. Translating quite simply to a Korean person living outside of Korea, Kyopo is not a pejorative term, as you may believe. Aligned with terms like Chicano or Chicanx, which celebrate a hybrid identity of second, third, etc. generation Americans, or queer for LGBTQ people reclaiming a once derogatory slur, you're attaching the term Kyopo to this community celebrates a complex diaspora Korean identity that becomes part of the lexicon of political identities by 2020. While you take pride in your exhibitions in your work as a curator at LACMA, Kyopo will be the safe, dedicated, and elevated space in which you finally tell your story firsthand. You don't have to wear a too small hanbok ever again. And the room will be full of paper cuts celebrating our paper cutness and allies interweaving Kyopo neologisms and playing dissonant and gay music. Your children will have little sense of its radical contrast to some of the things that you're experiencing and feeling right now. But this banality is also a triumph. I am more accustomed to writing texts on contemporary art and artists, and this letter has been one of the more difficult pieces of writing for me in a while. It may come across as self-indulgent, but perhaps that is part of the antidote to the poison of invisibility injected by the machinations of white America. There's always going to be a fight, and you will go from being a foot soldier to a clever commander who delivers aid and aims for truces and treaties. When Hannah Jones writes, quote, "It was by virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all," end quote. Yes, she is absolutely correct. And this is your story that makes you American, makes you you, and makes you belong. With the deepest and most complex self-love and respect, Christine. P.S. Bet some coin on a Korean film named Parasite in just about every category at the Oscars 2020. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Christine.
Thank you.
I think now we'll move on to Josh Klein, who is an artist who
is working on I believe is working on yet another show now, and she is going to read a letter of a slightly different tone, but I think also quite entertaining and pointed in its own way to the U.S. Immigration Services. So I'll hand it over to Jesse.
Thanks, Chris. The United States of America, I-797, Notice of Action. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. A. A,
A,
A, A,
A, A,
A,
A,
A, A, A,
A,
A, A,
A,
A, A, A, A,
A,
A, A, A, A, A. National Benefits Center, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration SVC, P.O. Box 648003, Lee Summit, MO 64002, USCIS Contact Center, www.uscis.gov/contact center, Form I-797. October 16th, 2020.
This thing fell off.
Okay, well, do whatever you want to do with them. Put them back in the box or whatever.
Okay. U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Dear USCIS, it's been a year since I've written to you. A year and 592 pages of evidence, petitions, photos, clippings, medical records, criminal records from South Korea, Hong Kong, and Canada, biometrics, itineraries, letters, university certificates, and a plastic card later. You'd be happy to know that I'm still keeping true to my last promise made to you as an EB1 alien of extraordinary ability visual arts category. I'm still a visual artist and I'm not stealing other Americans' jobs, at least not yet. Although we have been writing to each other for over a decade, there's still a lot you don't know about me. Maybe it's finally time that we dig a bit deeper. 1,678 pages, 67 letters, over 80 stamps, and 18 years later. I want to tell you about my grandmother, Eok-sun. Eok-sun was her name. Eok-sun was a professional Korean folk dancer, Kayagan player, and a dedicated Buddhist. She lived in 2 temples in Seoul and on Jeju Island. She wrote out Buddhist scripts every day for hours, days, and decades. Every time I visited her, we ate soybean sprouts with metal spoons. Her last words to me were, "You are gold president, 금 대통령." She loved to make up words that made no sense to anyone but her. I didn't get to attend her funeral because I was landlocked waiting for my green card. To this day, I think about all the strange words I missed out on, all the losses I'm still carrying from far away, and the taste of soybean sprouts that I can never emulate. I still think of her oversized gray linen outfits and the fuchsia cushion that she used for her knees after daily 108 bows and chants. I still think of the garden balsams that she crushed and stained my nails with. I still think of the time when I only spoke one language, and that language was whole. Who do you think of when you're reading these documents? Is it me? Is it you? Or is it us? Warm regards, Jesse Chun, Gold President, Chun Gyeonga. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jesse. I was curious about how that sounded, and now we know. But yeah, I'm almost tempted. I don't know if you have the name or the number of the person that you interviewed you and kind of required 5,000 pages of documentation, but I want to send him this book and tag your letter to him.
It was the whole agency. There's like not a single person. Like I
Yeah.
wouldn't know who, but
You just have to send like 5,000 copies to the agency. Thank you so much. I think next we'll have Kim, who is the curator and head of programs at CCA Wadis. And she has an upcoming show that she's curating of Maya Cruz Palileo's work. So Kim, if you want to take it away, thanks.
Thanks, Daisy, and thanks, Chris, for organizing, and thanks to my co-readers for sharing these really powerful letters. It's always an honor to read alongside all these brilliant thinkers and writers. The letter I'm going to read was originally written early on in the pandemic. It was following some conversations with In-sung Kim, who's actually here today. Hi, In-sung, about refusing translation and how so much of our time is wasted translating to white audiences when we so desperately, urgently need to have our own family arguments. Okay. Each day, I receive multiple emails that wish for my health and safety during this unprecedented moment. I wonder why these same people don't consider our health and safety during any other moment of any other day. They send wishes of wellness before they cancel projects or withdraw funds and use the crisis as an excuse to eliminate jobs, opportunities, and existing commitments, thrusting more of us into precarity. Their wishes are just exercises in capitalistic productivity rather than true acknowledgements of an overwhelming collective state of grief over the loss of our livelihoods. It is convenient for them that we are distracted, saddened by humanity, that we live in a bad society where greed, racial neglect, surveillance, and class violence run rampant, where grandmothers die alone while capitalism gets to keep on living like the Karen that she is. White liberal settler legacies undergird the rich protecting the rich and the white protecting the white. Power eternally protects power. Each week, our students ask why anyone has to work or go to school now or ever again. We have no real response except to say that we should just release everyone from prison. Literal first, but also imagined, why not? And once that's done, we can toss out the rest of this universe along with the trash bag it came in. Why does it take the extraordinary for us to care for one another? And even then, not nearly enough. Living in this country is like waiting to be robbed, and dying in this country is just being robbed. Strike still on, kids. Each morning begins with the same routine: half-hearted exercise, followed by less than half-hearted email, remembering to eat, but somehow not eating what we used to, just something to stay alive. I have started and stopped writing this text more times than I can count, because who counts time anymore, except for bosses and the bosses of bosses? Let's make another pact to stop caring about either of them. Netflix says a Korean drama about a woman who falls in love with a hologram is a 98% match for me. And you know this algorithm sees me, because what else is my life other than unrequited love with ghosts? Let us always stay devoted to this haunting. And ghosts only, please, no zombies. Those are for the white men at dinner parties who talk about how we live in Western civilization and therefore should care about the Greeks, which I don't know anything about. Whatever is birthed out of the cradle of capitalism sounds like their fantasy, and no one is here for it. Whenever these men expound the importance of art history and how it must be preserved, what they actually mean is that it must be protected. They can keep all the corpses. Here's that trash bag. Each time this happens, we conjure the wise words of Nesbitt Crutchfield, who said, "We have a right to determine our own destinies, our own non-capitalist paths." He reminded us that to know our history is to love ourselves first, to be seen as whole. Unsurprisingly, he makes no mention of the Greeks. Each year, a different room, mostly the same faces. We come together, and the beginning and the end remain the same. We say this is a broken system, and the more times we point to this broken system, the harder it gets to climb back up. It does not get easier to say out loud that I am tired of the fight, because the fight is long and the institution is winning. I see it marked on my body and the bodies of everyone I love. I worry about the white people listening, who take this statement as quitting, who interpret this sentence as a cry for white saviorhood, because a life constructed on possession will never understand one that is carved out of dispossession. I cannot handle the burden of white people who listen but feel guilty hearing this. Their emotional journey is not and never will be ours. White devils versus unwanted allies, on and on and on and on. We have figured out the engravings on all of our tombstones. She worked hard, still dead. We hold each other, I told you, and you, and you, and you. I hold you when you cannot hold yourself any longer. And I know you will hold me when I cannot hold myself. I don't want to talk about a broken system right now, maybe never will again, but I'm dramatic like that. So I will likely talk about it later and reverse this promise. We are allowed to be weak sometimes and to break our resolve because we can only hold so much. And I grant myself permission to quit. And I hope you and you and you and you will do the same, because we stand here together, holding each other on the precipice of absolutely nothing, with the belief that the bottom of this jump is abolition and not reform, always and forever, measured in our bodies, crossed over our hearts, promised to die. So for those of us who cannot leave, this is for you. Tomorrow, I want to speak about the well of arrogance we have to dip into to keep living. I want to speak about recognizing our own worth and the worth of everyone dear to us. I want to speak about indecent love. We don't do this because the fight is rewarding or because we believe it will change or because we think the institution will ever treat us as human beings. We do this because we love each other, even if the institution will never love us back. These people think we are not worthy of their education, their mentorship, their opportunities, not worthy of their love. But I'm here to say we love each other deeply and with full hearts in a way that is completely indecipherable to them, because their existence is constructed on individualism and imperialism, and ours is built on each other, even in pieces, or especially in pieces. Soon, I want to be able to openly and legibly speak about liberation, about a future that does not belong to anyone but ourselves, without white people thinking this voyage is purely personal, the repercussions of our individual scars. They don't understand. They don't understand that we are doing this not because we are trying to convince anyone of anything, but because we love each other too much not to. They don't understand that liberation can mean multiple endings and not a new frontier. Eventually, I want our love for each other to mean we can critique one another, be honest about the precision of our politics, and use the sharpest tips of our knives to emphasize that we are not monolithic and neither are our politics. And even when you are on the right side, you can use and be used, and we will never become if we are always speaking for them and to them, answering their calls, cleaning up their messes, explaining and explaining, waiting for them to transform their well wishes into the actual transformation of our lives. The family argument is ours to have, and we can never have it if we are trapped in conversations around inclusion and equity, tokenism, solidarity, and allyship, as if those words mean anything anymore. We all know that even if we find new terms, they'll just take those and ruin them too. Next time, I want to speak about joy as disobedience, as a betrayal of all the systems and structures that are trying to destroy us. Legality has failed us many times over. Good people will not turn a rotten apple into a ripe one, just as white people will never turn upon a system that they constructed and that allows them to continue to exist. This is not about the power you know, and I want us to stop asking permission from this power, as if an institution that checks boxes, makes strategic hires and acquisitions, and signs letters denouncing its own racism will improve the material conditions of our loved ones. When given the opportunity to take care of us or it, they choose art history over history and legacy over our lives always. And ultimately, I want none of us to return to work anyway, because our dreams were never about jobs. Someday we will better articulate the curvatures of our loneliness, or these articulations will not even be necessary, as they will just be known. The more I learn about myself and the people I love, the more I learn about everyone we love before us and after, the lonelier and more alienated I feel in this universe. It is a type of knowledge that enriches some relations and poisons others, as our languages become less legible and our thoughts are too fast to be slowed. In the search for horizons, there are no returns. We could want a future that we do not know and mourn the loss of the past we never had all at once. Thus, the contradiction of our lives. We are incongruous with this world in the best and worst ways, in need of and bound by an intense love that is unwavering yet uneven, living for each other, not because we are against them, even if being against them consumes our living. Trinity Minha says that the physical and psychic conditions of our world show that we are a profoundly heartsick society, that sometimes a sickness of the system may help to chart new ground, bringing out what lies dormant and open one's sight to what's already flowering within. When a flower blooms, here and now, the world comes into being. And in the end, another spring. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Kim. And we should mention that Kim is penning a book on the long goodbye. And what I think is very touching about this letter for Best is that we're unsure if the long goodbye is for the system or for our own body. And perhaps if it is for our own bodies, it doesn't matter because we are living for each other and it's more than just ourselves as individuals. So thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is John Tain, who helped organize and coordinate this panel. So we have him to thank for this. And he is the head of research at Asia Art Archive based in Hong Kong. And he also oversees teams in Delhi and Shanghai. Among all of his many activities, he recently came out with a book that he edited called Uncooperative Contemporaries, Art Exhibitions in Shanghai in 2000. And he will be reading his letter today to Yasuhiro Ishimoto with images, I believe. So I think John will share his screen.
Thank you, Chris. So let's go ahead and start. Okay. Dear Yasuhiro Ishimoto, you have been on my mind of late. This may not be all that surprising, given that I've been researching you these last few years. My motivation had come from admiration for Someday, Somewhere, 1958, and Katsura, 1959. Publications whose sheer formal inventiveness are considered to have opened a path for generation of Japanese photographers after you, including Daido Moriyama and Shomei Tomatsu, and led to what has widely been regarded as the golden age of the photo book. I knew that you had been seen as a bridge between the Japanese post-war era and the modernism of the Institute of Design in Chicago, founded as the New Bauhaus by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy in 1937, and where it had generally been understood you learned photography with Harry Callahan, while a student from 1948 to 1952. And no doubt this reading is right. However, research uncovered a carefully assembled album of your photographs taken during the war years, demonstrating that to a great extent, you had learned modernist photography while at Camp Amachi in Colorado. You were first taught by fellow inmates, some of whom were professionals, much as the younger artist Ruth Asawa had learned drawing and painting from Disney animators who were also incarcerated with her. The astonishing photographs from the camp changed our understanding of your work. You took enough pride in them to have made it the album and to have shown them to others when you were first starting out there. But something about the response you got made you hide these photographs for the remainder of your lifetime, possibly out of embarrassment or a sense that they best be forgotten. Your wanting to put that chapter of your life behind you would not have been so unusual. After the war, the pressure to assimilate as fully as possible into white American culture was intense. But as much as you have tried, others would not let you forget your difference. Strangers would accost you in the street while you were photographing, and the artist Minor White wrote in an exhibition pamphlet over your objections that your training may have been Western, but your, quote, tradition of seeing, unquote, was Oriental, turning what should have been a moment of celebration, your first one-person museum show, into a reminder of stigma. You knew intimately the contradiction at the heart of being Asian American and lived the social impossibility of inhabiting both terms at once. Given the resurgence of racism and anti-Asian sentiment across the United States now, not to mention the government's renewed use of detention centers, it'd be hard not to think of what you went through. Your biography offers a stark reminder that current events are a part of a longer history, one that encompasses the incarceration of over 120,000 Issei and Nisei. Indeed, the refusal to acknowledge people of Asian descent as Americans, much less as human beings, has been around since the 19th century, when the first wave of immigrants arrived as laborers. An indication of where attitudes stood during your lifetime can be seen in the fact that sociologists at UC Berkeley deemed it perfectly acceptable to use the terms spoilage and salvage to describe individuals coming out of the camps. But if I continue to think of you, it is not just because you were Japanese American. It is also because you lived your life as an artist. That is, where others may have seen only doors closing, you saw also an opening onto possibility of solidarity. You intuitively understood that the discrimination you had experienced paralleled the racism faced by African Americans present in your work. You were not the only photographer to work with Black Chicago Chicagoans with empathy and understanding. Wayne Miller, who taught at the around the time of the Northern Need, quote, they were feeling about their daily life and their families, unquote. But Miller's photos are often taken at a distance, suggesting that he ultimately acted as an ethnographer, understanding the people he documented as a them. By contrast, your images frequently concentrate on the individuals themselves. When you look into their faces, you saw people like you, a we. This much is clear from the careful juxtaposition of children from Chicago, most of them African American, side by side with children in Tokyo. Of course, such a world was someday somewhere, as the title of your first book suggests. But it is still remarkable, given that your work came about at a conjuncture when notions of intersectionality and allyship, much less Asian American identity, had not yet come into being. It may have been dream work, in other words, that you were doing in these photographs, but it is no less real. So I will continue to carry not only, but also as an inspiration for what is possible. For that, I thank you. Yours, John.
Thank you so much, John. And I wanted to also mention that some of the writers wrote to people who have passed, like John has just done. And thank you so much for sharing those images as well. And even though some people in the book are no longer with us, they are with us in so many ways and inform our work and our practice. So that was such a beautiful tribute. Last but not least, we have Spencer Ye, who is an artist and a musician and improviser and composer. So I won't say more and I'll just let you start, Spencer.
Okay, great. Can you all hear me, right? Yeah? Cool. Awesome. I'm gonna hit no wait, actually I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do this. Do this instead. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's pretty fantastic to hear these texts read aloud, to see like faces and flesh moving, and like some people I know, some people I don't, etc. And there was a mention of vulnerability, and like taking that sort of as a thing. I want so much to dig into this, like right now in this moment, like sort of instead, especially, how I thought about my own sort of letter after I hit send, and then like months later during this really fucking crazy time, like then there's the book. But whatever. I thought it best to do my reading. I wrote this down, by the way. It helps me. I thought it best to do my reading in the place where it was written, which is my closet studio at home, which I moved into around late summer 2019. And it was an unfortunate turn of events that very, very worked out, actually, in 2020. And I had thought about other performative or interpretive ways to present my letter. However, I kind of feel like the most intense or experimental thing I can do with this text, and what I've heard about it, is to just do a reading, which everyone else pretty much has done, which is fantastic. So August 2020, this writing, capturing a moment, commemorating it perhaps, for better or for worse, almost as if it were a monument made out of words. A word monument. Words on pages. And the pages make the monument. So it's a page of words monument. Okay. Firstly, let me take a moment to shout out my AZAM rhinos in the field. Since then to now, no one truly feels our pain. If there is any pain, right? We know how to be that exotic in the field. We know how much that value means. And yet, Where is there even to go with it? We are tired of eating it. But I kind of feel like that's pretty much what we gotta do again. I simply don't know if I trust our expressions against it as being any good. And one thing I forgot about the beginning notes to mention was that I would probably be dropping in some notes here or there alongside, the text that I had written. Okay, we'll just skip that. So here's my best attempt at a thesis. Because of the alienation, trauma, and abuse experienced as an immigrant in largely white communities in the US, I got a lot of anger and a lot of pain. I'm not having much of a support network or guidance available. Not meaning I didn't grow up with that. I just sort of made up my own way to get through life. For better or for worse, not really familiar with, all these other things that, other people talk about, like, therapy or something. Being trained in the best that a white male supremacy can give you, though, the next thing I maybe should have included in the text, because maybe it wasn't mine to use. As a side note, I never felt very much draw or attachment to much. Okay, we're going to skip that. I also had been thinking a ton about this tweet, which is, and I kind of feel like this is sort of the important part that links August 2020 to me now, May 25th, and all the pills that I might have been taking since then. So, okay, so there's this tweet by @Sloan_Jet. A hard lesson I had to learn as a survivor. You are doing a disservice to yourself, your healing, and everyone around you if you only consider yourself someone who can be hurt, but never as someone who can cause harm. It's often hard to admit you've been hurt, assaulted, and survived. It's also hard to admit that you have the capacity for harm too. But if you are in any way committed to the project of actual transformative justice and abolition, you must hold both those truths. And yeah, of course, now at this moment, all the stuff, May 25th, 2020, that kind of applies. So I've also finally gotten on this path recognizing that for better or for worse, I've also contributed to the climate of harm, to being damaging, to hell, I don't know what else, toxic, etc. Just through participating, to being around, and kind of going with what I think that I was, I don't know. I mean, it's just, oh, that's 6 minutes. All right. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, Spencer. If his letter looks like concrete poetry as well, so I feel like everyone should read the actual text and language too, because things are crossed out, things are capitalized, and the shape of your letter was one of the poems in the book.
Yeah, thank you, because originally also I know that I'd requested it be designed in this particular way, but then I kind of realized that it was like kind of a device to distance myself from being placed in a particular time, which is another story for another time. With, if anyone wants to hear about it, maybe we'll cross, but probably not.
Might be a good time for a Q&A if anyone in the audience has questions for any of the readers or writers.
So can I ask a question to Jesse, which is, how did you decide the form of the first letter you showed?
Oh, you mean visually or the sonic?
Yeah. Yeah, the
Oh.
visual, yeah.
Yeah, so the first letter is actually a letter from the government to me when I got my permanent residence. And I redacted that, just erased it, just leaving the A's and the ah, because that's kind of how I felt. I was like, ah, literally to translate. It's a lot of ahs in like both negative and positive, but also just this kind of traumatic, like, ah, if I were to really like sum it up. Yeah, so it was kind of just using erasure to make that letter. And then I just scanned it. So, you know, the scanner kind of fucks it up. So it gets all like, kind of like my background. It's the same letter in my background. So anyway, yeah. I hope that answers.
I'm curious to know from some of the other readers if you struggled when given the prompt of a letter and the myriad possibilities, you know, imaginary people, dead people, non-people, you know. Um, I really struggled, and it's in some ways in the first person, there's an aspect of it that it's the most natural. It's how we speak to one another, you know, and yet in relation to the most of the writing that I've been doing really over the past, you know, 10 years, I had to really kind of compartmentalize and veer in different direction. And I, you know, I had a couple of ideas before settling on this one. So I'm just curious to know if anyone else had a kind of, you know, a process to getting to, you know, what the letter was and doing it to share.
I mean, it was really hard for me. I'll go on. I think I was the last one to contribute. Daisy could confirm. Like, I mean, it took me months. Like, I just went back and forth about it. And like, I don't know. I mean, my art it's personal, but it's not personal. And like, I never talk publicly. I mean, everyone around me knows a lot of this stuff, like my friends and family, but like, I never write about this stuff publicly or like speak that much about it. And so I don't know, it was surprisingly like difficult to go there. And like, I don't know, talk about like my own personal past. Yeah, so anyway, I apologize for any delays to the publication of the book.
I don't know if this is, it's maybe is similar, but I felt like the problem that I had was also the crux of the thing. So like there was an aspect of it that felt really self-indulgent. And I think I even said that in the letter. But it was like, well, why does this feel so self-indulgent? I mean, people do this all the time, like talk about themselves, blah, 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 you know, on and on and on. Like, you know, is what part of the conditioning that, you know, of my cultural upbringing, milieu, etc. It was like, no, put that personal stuff, you know, the soft stuff aside and do focus on this. That made it when I finally was forced myself to center that first person narrative, that it felt so completely dislocating when that should be the locus itself, you know?
I mean, sorry, I feel like I'm jumping in. Other people should jump in too. But like, I could definitely relate to that. I mean, I've thought a lot about that over the years where like, you know, I just feel like it's like something that was instilled. I mean, like maybe not even verbally, but like from my mom and like, you know, her culture was that you're not really supposed to like make too much of a fuss about yourself publicly. It's not, you know, like as opposed to like, I think my white family members or like white people around me, like where it's like, it's all about yourself, you know, like, and like, I think for many Asians and like Asian Americans, like you're supposed to like hide the self and like not put the self forward. And like, I think this is a thing in like, even in my own work and like a lot of other people where like, and for me, I've embraced it. I'm like, well, actually, maybe we've had too much art about the self, especially from white people. But like, you know, yeah, I don't know. Like it is a thing. And like, this was very different because it's like all about, at least for me, the letter that I chose to write, it's like, it's all about the self.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is kind of interesting is because, you know, then from there, like, there's this whole other sort of thing about, like, whatever it is that you're sending out there, right? How it's received and how it's handled. And in some ways, kind of how it sort of defines, like, interaction between, like, two people, you know, whether eventually, like, in person or not, you know? Like, yeah, okay. I'm gonna have to think about this for a second.
Yeah, it's
Kim
true.
and John, do you want to respond?
I think kind of just building on what Spencer said about the reception of it, I think there are just, we have to think so much about the consumption, about who is actually receiving this content that we're creating and whether we're producing it for them or not, and I think very often, particularly within the sort of artistic, predominantly white, sphere that many of us have to operate within, there is a conscious effort to also be protective, of this kind of information about our personal selves, because very often it is weaponized against us, or for a multitude of reasons that I don't need to reiterate here because of this particular audience. But I think that that also feeds into the kind of care, like caution around actually kind of delving into some of those conversations. But I also think that the awareness about when we're doing it, and it also can be used, in terms of exploited or turned into something that's actually opportunistic in a certain kind of way. I think that kind of tension that we're always sort of negotiating about, yeah, it's like even beyond just whether it's self-indulgent, but it's like, are we being used for something that's actually far more nefarious as well?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's sort of thing. Like, I'm totally taking the floor for a second, but thinking about like for example, people talk about like social capital or something, right? And basically taking like a very, very incredibly personal thing, which you know what, it's not bad to actually like have some really important personal shit happen like in a space that is this big, right? Not everything needs to be right here, right? You know, however, it sometimes feels like people are taking things that are like here and kind of putting them on an altar and like sort of sacrificing them, you know, because like we've all known and seen like people who are like incredibly vulnerable and, uh I forget the words, but like incredibly candid on like social media, right? And I don't know, just the way that it's like, yeah, okay, I'm losing the words right now. Sorry.
Maybe I can jump in while you're thinking further, Spencer. I guess to answer your question, Christine, I think, yeah, it was like a really hard thing for me to kind of think about, like, oh, when I got the invitation, like, what do I write about? And I wasn't sure I had something to write about, because I think, the kind of tendency to not want to talk about myself or put myself front and center, was very kind of like, like, what do I want to reveal in a way that would be actually productive? And I think I'm really impressed that I think many people who did contribute to the book did manage to write about autobiographically in a way that felt really kind of generative. And including the readers here. I think in my case, I wasn't sure that I could do that. But then it occurred to me that, I think the research, the work that I've been doing on Ishimoto, I think that actually it was also very hard for me to do, partly because it resonated so much on so many levels with me personally. And I think it kind of was that I found so kind of resonant in his work and why I found it so powerful. And so in some ways, it was less about kind of like speaking to the Asian experience or Asian American experience than speaking from the Asian American experience and finding like what was it that made it a place that like, you know, we can speak from that I think is meaningful. Maybe that's what I would say.
I think Mark Handelman had a question, but his hand is down, but I think he did.
Oh, hi. Sorry about that. I was trying to chat in. First, I just wanted to say how much I've so enjoyed hearing everyone read tonight and speak tonight, and it's also just been such an honor to be part of the project. But my question was sort of relating to this question that came up just a little bit ago in terms of, you know, who is the audience for this content, or you know, in what ways are these sort of stories making their way into the world? And I'm wondering from everyone here tonight who's participated, if anyone else is trying to keep certain people from not reading your contribution. I'm actively in a very awkward position of reaching out to certain family members and trying to, you know, not get the word out. And it's something I'm negotiating. I'm wondering if anyone else is in that boat. Somewhat of a selfish question.
Yeah, I have, and I have had that experience, and I think the way that I've sort of resolved this, and I don't think it's you know, I'm not putting it out there as this some example of something people should consider or do, but I've gotten to a place where it's like, if people ask, you know, if they're curious, it's less about someone being hurt or someone being inspired or, you know, what I think they'll get from this, but really, and there have been a couple family members, and I think, you know, I think still to a lot of people in my family and family's community have no idea what museum curators do. So I think, you know, the questions even have to go rewind before they can, you know, move forward in some ways. So I don't know, that's kind of how I've sort of resolved it in some, to make sense of it for myself.
Out of
Maybe,
curiosity, Mark, have you received people like people who have read your letter and reactions from them?
No, a couple people. I recently shared with my mother because I hadn't told my parents about this at all, and I was really nervous about it. And you know, she was supportive, but you know, there's a section where I talk about my uncle, her brother, and you know, we didn't want him. I really didn't want him to read this, you know, and so and it's true with some other family members. I think there's just so much. Personally, there's a lot of stories that involve a lot of shame, and for in a lot of ways, you know, I wrote to my sister Mika, and there are so many of the things I shared we've never talked about as a family, you know, and so there was something something very vulnerable about making something public that I hadn't even, you know, spoken to my parents about in many ways. So anyway, it's interesting now that it's out, but it's great too.
I mean, it's
I'm
kind
sure
of
they're
wild.
ready for this to come out. Anyway.
I mean, that was one thing that was kind of wild, was like, given like at this point we could sort of read the various sort of scales of audience readership and where it might go. You know, what it was, again, it was like really great to hear like everyone read, because like basically the feeling I got was that like oh, all of a sudden there was a place to put something, right? You know, there was so much actual like autobiographical information, and it felt like it kind of like placed itself like all the way across the board in this way to where then like instead of being like, oh, you know, everyone just wants to talk about blah blah blah, it's just sort of like where else are you gonna put it? You know, like who wants to hear it? But at the same time, like who are you gonna make want to hear it? You know, that's absolutely ridiculous as well. You know, as the way that we've been taught. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that this is actually for I actually have a question for the editors, for Daisy and Chris, because like I feel like you know it was a really kind of fantastic surprise to kind of see the content and how in some ways there's so much kind of but not kind of the reinforces the letters reinforce each other and kind of resonate with each other. And I was wondering if you could speak as editors about what that experience was like, what to see the final kind of result. Like, did you know what it was going to be like?
I think we had an inkling because when we contacted people often over the phone, there was some brainstorming about who a letter might be written to and what might be addressed. But going with what I think many people have said tonight, well, I think like all of the writers, and speaking for myself, I rarely share personal or autobiographical notes. Certainly, I don't share my personal life with my family, and I generally, in the context I work in, don't have a opportunity or space to share family or autobiographical notes to art people. So I think Daisy and I, and Daisy can respond too, really appreciated the, as Spencer said, the kind of the through line of autobiography, which in context does not seem, I remember, I mean, Christine, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I remember when we were going back and forth, Christine, you said in an email, please tell me if this is indulgent. And it's interesting how from the editorial standpoint, my response was, what are you talking about? I mean, you were the first Asian curator at the Studio Museum. I think that was it, right? You said something like, does this sound indulgent that I'm stating this? And I'm thinking, no, it's historic. I mean, this is like really important. So it's interesting how differently maybe you as writers or I myself view myself. And then, of course, if we ask a peer, it's like, no, it's not indulgent. This is really useful information. This is incredible that you're sharing. Thank you for sharing. But what was your sense, Daisy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were also really surprised because we had talked about this, Chris, where we knew a lot of our contributors through professional things and going to openings and such, and we had never ever heard these sides of stories. And so to read them, like we were so touched, and like a lot of the times we would just like text each other, we're like, oh my God, we're crying, or like this one made me laugh so hard, but in these kind of more professional settings, we like kind of silenced our own stories, or so to read them, especially in this way, was really touching, and I hope that other people find them equally interesting. And yeah.
It's interesting. In a conversation I had with another person involved with Stop Discrimination, SDA, we posed the question to ourselves of what would be the most radical thing for us to do as Asian Americans or diasporic Asians in North America or in the US, or however you want to bookend it. I guess I throw that out there because I think this is a radical space where, I don't share, there's a lot of personal stuff that I don't share with my family, yet I'm not going to go share them with my coworkers. And, of course I have, my partner, very close friends who know me in different contexts, but I think we kind of, compartmentalize these conversations in ways that are what we deem appropriate for certain, whether they're two-way exchanges or audiences or what those forms might be. And so, in some ways, this does have that kind of, radicality to that it's capturing all of this in one place, in one book. But maybe I throw that out there also, if this has come up for any of you, and kind of what could that look like in this moment that we're in, in a sort of Pan-Asian American moment. I mean, there's obviously, been a lot of journalism and a lot of kind of interrogation and unpacking of Asian American identities, recently. Anyway, throwing that out there.
One thing sorry to just cut back in again, but one thing I forgot to say earlier was that, like, in some ways during the readings, I was like, what if we were actually writing to each other across this 70 plus, grip of people? Because on one hand, it's like, oh, well, it's a closed thing. But like, no, like there's nothing wrong with having just a very small thing and having it just exist as it is, And like, as I was hearing people reading, I was like, maybe it was sort of like, maybe I was writing my letter to, everyone else in the TOC. I don't know, I mean, that's kind of an interesting way for me to think about it, rather than this idea of it being like a statement of like where you stand, and that you will like absolutely cover every fucking thing and absolutely not be canceled because of it. It's like we're talking to each other, because like what you were saying, Christine, there is not that space. You can't check in. I mean, there's not that space to check in the art world anyways, but it's just like, it's additional floor.
What's crazy is actually, like, I feel like it's not a small space. Like, what's amazing about this book is actually how many people are in it. And I think one of the things that this book has hammered home for me is just how many people of Asian descent are involved in the arts, and yet how that mass is never visible together. Like sometimes groups of us go out for dinner and we bitch and complain about like various like racist things that have happened to us, or about like other conditions. But like, when have, like how often do you see an art show that's like all Asian American? How often, but not necessarily making work about identity? Like how often do you see, it's like, something that's come up, like I'm in, it's not as formalized as Gyopo, but there's like a loose group of like Filipinos in the arts. And like, we were toying for years with the idea of like doing a show in Manila of like, Filipino artists. We were going to call it Some Americans. And like, the names, when you put them together, it's like an amazing list of people, but nobody ever is like, oh, they're all Filipino, and that informs like what they're doing. Nobody ever puts them together, because the idea is, oh, well, we can have like one Asian in an art show. We can have one Asian contributing to this, one Asian curator at the museum, and then that's it. That's our quota filled, And like, this book, I think, is so great because it's like, no, we're going to hold this space and we're going to open it up, and like, we're all going to put these like very personal things in here, almost like a time capsule for the future. Because the other thing is like that this book has made me think about is the fact of, or like there's been nothing like this that I can think of before, where like coming up as a young artist, where there was like some kind of text representing like so many like, really like vivid people involved in art, writing about their experiences in it from like, like a diasporic Asian perspective. And like, so I don't know. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I guess these are just changes. I mean, yeah.
I agree with you, Josh. And I feel like I think, I forget who asked this earlier, but it was like, oh, I think it was Mark, like who's the audience, or who are you thinking of when you're writing? And I actually was thinking a lot about my students, because I taught at VC. Well, I'm not gonna say the school, or maybe I will, but so basically There's some students who, like Asian students who came up to me, Asian American students who came up to me and said, there's like a specific faculty member who keeps mixing all of them up, and they've been in his class for like a year or 2 years, right? And he just calls them all by the wrong names, and then he thinks they're all the same person. And then he went up to one of them and was like, you should join my class because all the Asians are taking it. And so I just remember like feeling like just so angry, and just, I think also when I was in art school, I did not have that kind of, like I didn't really have faculties of color. It was just like very white education. And I feel like I had to literally, after I graduated, I had to Google and like find people, like literally find post-colonial theorists of color, because I wasn't exposed to it. And I think things have definitely changed now, but at least when I was in grad school, it was like that. And so I just kept thinking about how, exciting it would be for these students to have something like this, so that, they don't feel so lost. And I feel like, at least for me too, like entering this, field, I feel like, it's kind of like what Spencer said. And I think Spencer and I've like talked about this over drinks a lot of times, but it's just like, you don't feel like there's like a real mentor or like a specific kind of like, lineage or whatever to cling on to or to place yourself in. And so I think hopefully this can kind of be that for people, of Asian diaspora.
Yeah, it was always our wish for people to meet each other through this book too. So, I hope that once the world opens up again in a more normal way, then we could all meet each other, meet other I mean, this was only the beginning. Like there's like thousands, like our list was like 500 people, and everyone was like doing so many incredible things. So I hope that
too.
Volume 2, who wants to support Volume 2? But I hope this is a beginning, and I love the question about radicality in our future. So I think that's a good way for us to think about what we'll do in the near future.
Mm-hmm. And I hope you'll all kind of stay in touch. I mean, we have this sort of foundation now, and I think we all have different relationships with different individuals, in this audience, as well as connected to the book. But, maybe this is a start of a different kind of chapter.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end this particular reading, which is to think about it as perhaps the start of another chapter. Any closing remarks, Daisy or John, John B. from Human Resources?
Just thank you so much. It was a really amazing event. Thank you for organizing this publication, and thank you to all the readers for sharing. Yeah, it was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see
Thank
you all in
you.
person soon.